right, welcome back to Sunrise Daily. Well, that's what we're starting off with this morning. We've got Mr. Jamie Angus, who is the Director of BBC World Service Group. Thank you for coming.
Hello, good morning. Hi.
You know, just looking at that, so many things run through your mind, but you've been on this for a while now. But from what you've seen, trying to tackle this headlong, you say, I think you said it was your absolute priority in some interviews. How much of a challenge is this phenomenon?
I think it is a really big challenge because what we want to avoid is people losing all their trust in all news organisations. We want people to understand that some news organisations have values that mean that it's worth putting your trust in them. So here in channels and also with BBC News internationally, that people know that there's proper journalism that underlies what we do. And so we want to encourage people to go back to the most trusted news brands where they can absolutely rely on what they're hearing, but also to help people understand how they can check their news and how they can be a bit more discriminating about what may be real and what may be fake.
So what would you consider to be fake news?
I think you're seeing more and more, partly people sharing fake news for economic reasons. So people are doing essentially clickbait, ad fraud. They're just trying to pump up page impressions online. But actually, more worryingly, organisations are pumping up fake news to stoke up ethnic tensions, intercommunal tensions that already exist, often around elections. That's a particularly big problem in Africa, in West Africa and parts of East Africa, where we've seen that when there are elections, people are often publishing stories that they know that are wrong, but for political purposes. And I think it's a job of a trusted news organisation like the BBC to be able to call some of those out when we see them, but also when people fake our own news reports. We've seen here in West Africa and in Kenya, in the Kenyan elections, people putting sort of faked versions of BBC News reports up and sharing them, for example, on WhatsApp. And that's been a big problem for us and something that we're spending more and more time looking at.
How are you going to do that? Because, WhatsApp, for instance, they don't consider themselves to be like the public publishing platform. So they think this is private. So how are you going to check that?
You make a really important point, and I think one of the things I'm particularly interested in is how people are using chat apps and messenger apps to share news content, because unlike the normal internet pages, they're not searchable, or social media, and they're not searchable like Twitter or Facebook. And so it can be very, very hard for us to know when fake BBC News content is being shared. And it's only really when people report it to us and we then put out a retraction saying, listen, this story is a fake, it's not a really BBC News story. So I think we have to accept that people will share news more and more in this way. And I suppose what I'm urging people is just don't share until you're sure. So just be careful until you know something is absolutely true. Don't share it maybe on a chat app, and only share on chat apps news that comes from a source that you really trust, whether it's a paper or the BBC or channels or somebody like that.
It does sound like we really can't fight this, can we?
I think you can fight it, actually. I think there's lots of things we can do. So we can increase standards of education around media literacy. So in all parts of the world, but in West Africa, it's a particular problem about how do you educate young people to understand what is trustworthy and what is fake. So media literacy is really important, but also it's important for Nigeria as well as other countries in West Africa to be able to invest more in quality journalism, to partner with a big international organisation like the BBC. We're producing a programme with you guys, with Channels TV this year. So where international trusted media organisations can help make a difference by partnering with local news organisations, that's a really good thing as well.
But besides the educating the people about the differentiation between fake news and real news, how about reaching out to the other journalists? Well, how would that help?
Sorry, say again?
Reaching out to the other journalists,
yeah.
The other media organizations that are, in quote, putting out the fake news. Is it possible to reach out to them about the ethics of journalism?
Think every country's got to find its own way to regulate and support quality media in their market, right? And so the way that Nigeria chooses or Ghana chooses or the UK chooses might be a little bit different. But I think we've got to find a way for quality journalism to be commercially sustainable. So for these papers, for your national papers and for your national TV stations to be able to make a decent return by investing in quality journalism, that's really important. That's something that a local regulator can sometimes help promote. And if that is successful and there's good independent regulation of the media, of quality media, then that helps the poor quality fake media get squeezed out. And I think that's what we all want to see.
Because we're at the point when it comes to fake news where it seems to be so difficult to decipher what's real and what's fake. Just like we saw the mimicking of the former president of the United States, Barack Obama, by an actor. But, technology has a big role to play in helping to enhance this. How can legislation for, say, African countries, for instance, help? Even in more advanced countries, the United States, for instance, how can legislation help to curb this perpetration of fake news?
Well, you're right that digital technology has at once made news massively more accessible to millions more people, but it's also lowered the costs of entry into the news business. So previously, you'd have had to buy a chain of newspapers or own your own TV station to get into the news game, but now anyone can do that, publishing from their own room. And I think there have to be penalties for maliciously publishing things that you know to be wrong. That's part of a properly regulated media industry. But I'd say there have to be rewards for doing it well. And I think for audiences need to, buy papers, watch commercial TV stations that they trust, and they have to continue to use international and trusted news providers like the BBC. So there's a kind of virtue argument that if you continue to support quality things that you value, then you squeeze out poor quality things that are damaging and malicious.
Sometimes errors by the big brands in the news industry, errors by staff cost them a great deal. There have been errors by the BBC sometimes. So how would that, and that has also added to those people losing their trust in the news brands. So how can that be